learning in the schos of Rafur Shleima for Harav Yosef Shleima ben Risha. We're learning in the schos of Rafur Shleima, all those that have been wounded in Israel, and for Aliyas Haneshama, for the many, way too many that we have lost just in the last week, Rahman al-Islam. And we're davening every single day, every moment of every day, that there should be a Yeshua and that there should be a Geula for all of our sisters and brothers in Israel and around the world. We're learning the Sikha on Parshas Noach, Chelek Chaf, Sikha Beis. This is an interesting Sikha with a fascinating history. This Sikha is the result of Rabbi Goldstein, Rabbi Levi Goldstein, who is and was a teacher for decades, who wrote a letter to the Rebbe with a question that he had. The Rebbe replied to his question, and there was another 3 times back and forth. There's 4 times in total that there was communication about this issue, and this Sikha is built on those communications. Of course, it's in Likutei Sichos, so it's Muga. It was edited, but it's unusual in that there's this history. And if you want, you could go on the project website and you could see something this week that's not there other weeks. It's called Aidais HaSicha, about the Sicha, where the original letter that Rabbi Goldstein sent appears with the Rebbe's comments in the margin, with what he wrote back, because he didn't understand. He had more questions. The Rebbe wrote back to him. This happened 4 times, and the result is this gem of a Sicha that we are zeichet to study this morning. Aleph. Ala pasuk v'Noach ben 600 shana v'amabul haya mayim ala aretz. On the verse that says that Noach was 600 years old and the mabul came upon the world. Nemar b'medrash, the medrash comments, sheshnas hamabul eina oila min haminyan, that the actual year during which the mabul occurred is not counted, is not included in the calculation of Noach's life. Kiloimar, this is to say, Kedivrei HaMefarshim, like the Mefarshim explain, that Shnas HaMabul Eina Nimnes Bein Shnaisav Shel Noach, that the actual year during which the Mabul took place is not included in the years of Noach. Kefi Sharayim, and this is not something that is a secret. You could see it. You could see it in the Torah. You could see in the Psukim that when the Eibishter recounts regarding the years of Noach, he does not count the year of the Mabul. How do we see this? If you make a calculation based on the Psukim of the Torah, you will find that Noach lived for 951 years, im shnas hamabel, that would include the year of the mabel, mashma, shamabel hayil achar sheis mea shana, and we learn and we understand that the mabel happened when Noach was 600 years old, because it says, vayihi ba'achas b'sheish mea shana. It says it was in the 601st year, chorvu hamayim, that the waters dried up. Uksiv, and it says, Vayechi Noach achar mabul shlois me'as v'chamishim shana. And then the pasuk says that Noach lived for 350 years after the mabul. So it's simple arithmetic. It's not higher math. He was 600 years when the flood came. He was 601 years old when the waters all dried up. And he lived another 350 years. However, uksiv, but it says, "Vayihi kol yemei Noach asher chai." Then the Torah says, and all the years of Noach that he lived, shamei shana v'chamishim shana, 950 years. So we are missing 1 year. And this was Rabbi Goldstein's question that started the whole exchange. I'm teaching this to my children in Alei Torah. It's not adding up. The Torah should have said that he lived for 951 years. Unless we come to the conclusion that the year of the Mabul is not accrued to the years that he lived, in the way that the Torah gives us the years. And why is it not included? So the Mefarshim say, Lefisha Haisa Shnas Tzara, because it was a year of travail and terrible occurrences. Loy also loy Shnas Hamabul Min Shnaisav. So that year was not accrued to his lifetime. Okay, that's the medrash that the Rebbe brings down on the pasuk. V'noach ben sheish mi'ashana v'hamabul hayamayim al aretz. And the medrash says, come back with me to the beginning of the paragraph, Shnas hamabul ino olam min haminyan, that the year of the Mabul is not included in the years of his life. And then the Rebbe gives us the cheshbon, cites the psukim, explains the question, and this is again the original question that was written to the Rebbe Rabbi Goldstein. Where is that year gone missing? A year gone missing. When you look at the psukim of the Torah, it's not adding up. And then we have the answer from the Medrash. Yeah, you're right. That year is not counted as a year of his life because of the great sorrows. Now, second paragraph. Farhuz bar pa'amim rabbis. It has been explained many times. Shemikach shirashi misbate b'mispar mekomis b'perusha alatari b'milim lo yodati ukadayme. That because Rashi expresses himself in a number of places in his commentary on the Torah, he says, I don't know, or something similar to I don't know. Move on is understood that in every place where there is a difficulty that is presented in the pshat of the pasuk, harehu mituritz beferish Rashi. This is Rashi's mandate. Rashi takes it seriously, and Rashi is comprehensive. He addresses every question that arises al pi pshat. So much so that he will address questions and then say, I don't know what the answer is. But he will at least raise the question. So then that means, that when he doesn't give any commentary, and he doesn't say, I don't know, or something like that, it means that the information that we are seeking is self-evident, or is found in previous psukim, or in previous commentary that Rashi already gave us. So the Rebbe wants to remind us of this rule, and lefize yesh lahavin. So based on Rashi's MO, the way Rashi wrote his Perush, we have to understand ha'uvda shesikum shnotav shel Noach bepasuk eina to'emes l'mispar kol shnoisav l'fnei v'acharei hamabul. That the fact that the number given as to how many years he lives does not align with, it's not calibrated with the amount of years that the Torah tells us before the Mabul and after the Mabul, and that is why the Medrash is forced to say that that year is not counted in his years of life. Histira baletes b'pshat psukim. Umadua ein Rashi mitaritzesa b'pirusha alatera. This is a glaring contradiction in the pshat. Why doesn't Rashi address it? It's very hard to understand. Again, he will sometimes even say, I don't know, but he will acknowledge that there's a problem. Here, Rashi doesn't acknowledge that there's a problem. It's also seemingly not information we have from previous psukim or previous Rashis. If anything, it's a contradiction to what the Torah tells us previously. And yet Rashi is silent. And so the Rebbe has to explain what is going on here. Now, before the Rebbe presents his understanding and his resolution, he's going to entertain other possible ways of understanding this. Okay, so first of all, he says, Ein loymar. Here's a thesis we cannot embrace. We cannot say, Shedato shel Rashi hi shebepashto shnas hamabel eino ela min haminyan. That Rashi doesn't have to say anything because it's so simple that this year of Noach's life is not counted. When the Torah gives us the sikum, when the Torah gives us the synopsis of how many years he lives, it gives us the number. It doesn't count it, but it's simple. It's simple. Like the Medrash tells us, Rashi doesn't tell us, it's simple. You can't say that. The Rebbe says, Lahefach, on the contrary. Ze chidush maftia. This is a surprising novelty that a year that is mentioned in the Torah should not then find its way into the amount of years that a person lived. It's very surprising. It's a novelty. Virashi tzarich hayeh la'omer b'perish. And Rashi would have to have said this very clearly if that was what Rashi's opinion is, that the year is not counted, like the Medrash says, because of the great sorrow that happened in that year. Ubim and especially kasher b'chishuv hamifurat nechshev shnas hamabel b'Torah b'minyan hashanim, especially because earlier the Torah very specifically does mention that year. We know that he was 600, like the Rebbe gave us in the first paragraph. The Rebbe gave us all the psukim. The Mabel came in the 600th year. In the 601st year, the waters dried up. So right there and then, the Torah is referring to that year. Then the Torah tells us he lived another 350 years. So it's 951. It's not 950. And yet the Torah maintains that it's 950. Kamor le'il, the Rebbe says, like I said above, betchila ne'emar shamabel hitchil b'shna sheish mir shana l'chayei Noach. In the beginning, we're told that the Mabel began in the 600th year of Noach. La'achar mikan ne'emar ba'achas v'sheish mir shana charvu mayim. And the Torah says very clearly, in the 601st year, the waters dried up. And Rashi is silent on this glaring contradiction, with the Torah saying that he lived 950 years instead of 951. We have a year gone missing. Beis. Nemar b'Torah. So, the Rebbe says, Nitan lahasbir zeiskach. So maybe we might explain it in the following way. Nemar b'Torah b'shnas sheish mir shana l'chayei Noach nifka'u. That it says in the Torah, in the year of the 600th year of Noach's life, the subterranean well springs were split open, and the Arubas Hashemayim niftachu, and the well springs from above opened and came down, right? So the Torah tells us about this two-way mabel coming from below and coming from above, and begins by saying bishnas in the 600th year. So the Rebbe says, Hamashmos hapshuta shel bishnas hi b'toich b'mahalek hashana. The simple explanation of the word bishnas within the year means in the year, sometime during the year. Efshar efer lahasbir. So maybe we could explain shebemilim bishnas sheish meres nifku hakavana hi b'tchilas hashana. That when the Torah says in the 600th year, it was at the beginning of that year. Kloimar, that would mean shebeknisa l'shnas hashesh shel chayei Noach, that it was at the time when Noach entered into his 600th year. B'yosei ben chomesh me'ez tishin v'teisha v'oid chelek katon shel shana. He was 599 years and a smidgen. Hitchil hamabel, and that's when the mabel started. So, by the way, I mean, this is something I think we can all acknowledge, especially when it comes to milestone birthdays. You start talking about how you're 40 like a year before, right? And then the next big thing I think is 60, and then the next big thing is 80. But you start to kind of relate to it, not mamish on the birthday, but already like going into it already, you're already talking about like that way. The Kevon Shahat Medayekas Omer Bishna Sheish Me'ez, and because the Torah is very specific and says in the 600th year, Hari Hechrachi Leimar, Shagam Hamashma Shel V'Noach Ben Sheish Me'ez Shana Amabel Hayamayim Al Aretz Hishamabel Yarad Bihi Konsoi L'Shnas HaSheish Me'ez. That because because the Torah says bishnas, so we could say that it's like it's imperative almost that the meaning of this is that Noach was going into his 600th year when the Mabul started. Hisha Mabul Yarad bihi koinse l'shnas hashesh me'ez. That the Mabul started when he went into his 600th year, or Kediyu Kanisuach, or based on the specific terminology, Vahamabul Haya Beloshan Avar, it says Vahamabul Haya, the Mabul was using the past tense. Shakasher Haya Noach ben Sheish Me'eshana Kvar Haya Hamabul Lefnechi. The Rebbe says maybe we could advance the following thesis or theory, that when it says that it was his 600th year, he wasn't yet mamish 600. He was approaching 600. He was like 599 and a little bit. And likewise, when it says that it was 601 years and the waters all dried up, we're not talking about 601 full years, but it was at the very beginning when he's going into his 601st year, that is to say, a little bit after he was 600 years old. That's when the waters dried up. But the Rebbe says, however, when we get to the bottom line, when the Torah tells us how many years Noach lived and does the calculation, the Torah is talking about full years, and it doesn't count a part of a year like a complete year. So based on that, it would mean that he lived 950 years. He lived 600 plus a little bit more until after the Mabul. I'm sorry, I think it's a typo here. Ad letchilas hamabul. He was 600 and a little bit before the Mabul started. And then another 350 years after the Mabul. So maybe that is the answer. But the Rebbe says, that's the first line of the third seif of this sikha. The Rebbe says, seemingly, this is not enough of an explanation. It's cogent, and we can relate to it. And we know that we always say the kapitel after how old we are, because we are going into the next year. Like, we all know this, but the Rebbe says, not enough. Why? Because there are other calculations in the Torah that we have to take into account. Noach doesn't live in a vacuum. There's other people in the world, and the Torah gives us information about their chronology and their generations. And let's look at this. Ala pasuk yamim oit shiva, on the pasuk where the Eibusher says, in another 7 days, I'm going to start the Mabul. Rashi says, say v'chashev Shneisav shel Shelek. So Rashi tells us that Shelek died, and this was the shiva of Shelek. And then Rashi says, go and think about the years. Consider the years of Mithushelach, the Timtzan, you'll find Shehim Kolim Bishnas Tov Reishon L'Chayin Noach. If you do the math, based on everything the Torah tells us, you'll find that Mithushelach died in the 600th year of Noach's life. Chishuv Zehu Kidelahalam. And this calculation is as follows. Mithushelach Chai Shameas V'Shisha V'Ocha Shanim. Mithushelach lived longer than anybody else, 969 years. The Kivon Shemithushelach Haya Ben 187 Shanim K'Shal Ha'ilid Es Lamach, and because Mithushelach was 187 years old when he had, I never know what it means, Hoilid. How is a man Hoilid? A man doesn't birth. But when this son, Lamach, was born to him, let's say, the Lamach Haya Ben 182 Shanim K'Shal Ha'ilid Es Noach, and Lamach was 182 when Noach was born to him. Okay. Ubisach Hakol. So what do we have if we put these two numbers together? We have 369 years. Yaitse. So what do we understand from this? That Mithushelach's whole life, which was 969 years, they end during the 600th year of Noach. Because the 600 years of Noach, which you add on to the previous two figures, 182 and 187, which is how old Mithushelach was when Lamach was born, and then how many years passed before Noach was born. And if Mithushelach died at that point, that the Torah tells us, and that means he died when Noach was 600 years old. How do we know? Because the Torah tells us Noach was 600 years old when the Mabul started. Here you have the full lifespan of Mithushelach, the 969 years. Now, the Chevon Mithushelach meis lifnei hamabul. Wait, did I say that right? No, it's not. Yeah, 969. And since Mithushelach died before the Mabul, Yetze, so it means Shahakavana shall b'shnas tov reishon l'chayin Noach. And when the Torah tells us that Noach was 600 years old, Nifka'u, the subterranean well springs of water opened up. He la'achar shenoach kvar haya ben sheis mea shana. This would mean that Noach is already 600 years old. And earlier in Seif Beis, the Rebbe said maybe we could advance the theory that Noach wasn't mamish 600 years old, but he was pushing 600, which we could all relate to. But then it's not going to align with the years of Mithushelach, and the Torah tells us all that also. In other words, you can't have people living at the same time, living in two different time brackets. The Pashas Nitan Hayilatarizais, maybe we would be able to explain it simply by saying as follows. Betzion Hagil Shaboy Nemar Kol Echad Shahilid is Benoi, that when the Torah gives us the ages of the people as to when their sons were born to them, the intention of the Torah is not to tell us to the day. Rather, the Torah tells us that after the father was such and such amount of time of years old, a child was born to him. Sometime during the year after this person turned 600, or after this person turned 182, or after this person turned 187. It's not telling us to the day. And the Rebbe in the parentheses here says it can't be that. Ki ilule kain, because if you don't understand this, that the Torah doesn't give us the exact birthday, but rather is telling us the general year when that next generation was born, then you have to say, Sheshes, ve'enosh, v'chol hadar shel acharhem, shel gabeim nemar vayichi shana vayivaled, noldu kulam b'diuk ba'isayim shenoled avihim. If you don't understand that the Torah is not giving you the exact birthday, it's giving you a ballpark figure of in which year they were born. If you don't understand that, then it means that everybody had the same birthday through all the generations. That is to say, all these people were born exactly on the same day, on the sixth day of creation, which is Rosh Hashanah. So every single person listed in the whole chronology from Adam Rishon till Noach, and even after Noach, all born on the same day as Adam Rishon was born. So Rabbi says, no, clearly that is not the intention. Rather, the intention of the Torah is to tell us in what general year they were born. So once we understand this basic idea, then it's understood שכיוון שסכום 187 השנים של מיסו שלח בהלידס למח וסכום 182 השנים של למח בהלידס נויח מחושב עם כל אחד מהם עם שארית מסוימת. So once we understand that we're not talking about an exact birthday, but rather a ballpark year, then that means that the numerical amount of 187 years, that is how old Mr. Chelek was when he got Lemach, when Lemach was born. And then Lemach was 182 years when Noach was born. So they're all being considered with some additional fraction. There's she'eris misuyemes. There's a little bit left over time. It's not mamish 182 years. It could be 182 plus a few weeks, plus a few days, plus a few months. Plus minus. But in addition to the fraction that stays over, the small fraction, hey mitztabrim l'shana shlema. But when you add up all these additional times, they actually accrue to a whole year. Asher mashlim ashneitzav shel miso shalach. And that is mashlim, it completes the year of Miso Shalach. Okay. But the Rebbe says, Achadayan a move on. But we're still going to have a problem with this. Still not understood. Okay, so we understand that the Torah is not telling us exact birthday. And so there's going to be a margin of weeks or months or days, and all of these are going to accrue. Okay, but the Rebbe says, Al Chet Dor Hafloga Omer Rashi, regarding the generation, the Dor Hafloga, the generation after the flood, that got this idea in their head that they were going to build a tower so that they could control heaven, control God, Chas v'chalila. Rashi says, what were they thinking? Amroi, they said to themselves, they had this working thesis, that achas le'elef v'tov reish nun vav shanim, that once in 1,656 years, harakia mismoitet kishem she'asa b'mei hamabel, the heavens crack and disintegrate like happened during the Mabel. So we have to do something about this. We have to build a structure that's going to keep the world stable. People think that climate issues are new. No. People have been worried about this for a very long time. And what do they have to do? They have to build towers. They have to take jets from conference to conference to speak about the carbon emissions. Okay, not going to go on that rant. So, they're going to build a structure to hold up the heavens. But here's the thing. This happens 1,656 years at that per increment. Now the Rebbe says, "Hachishuv shel elef v'tafresh nun vav shanim." That calculation of 1,656 years, husikum kol shneis ha'ileda shel hadaris haminuyim me'adam v'ad Noach. Where did they come up with that number? They didn't take it out of their elbow or from behind their ear. They put together all the years from the time of Noach. I'm sorry, from the time of Adam till Noach. That's how they came up with that year. But if we're going to advance the theory from the above in Seif Gimel, that there are extra fractions of years, and we're talking ballpark, Yaitse, then based on that, it comes out Shebechol echad me'aseres hadaris yesh she'eres mesuyema shel zman yamim shvuos v'chadashim, that in all of those 10 generations that they were basing their calculation of 1,656 years, there's all these she'erios, there are all these extra fractions. And the Rebbe says it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. She'ena nimnis besikum hakloli shel hashanim, and they're not integrated, they're not reckoned into the amount of years from the beginning of the world. This savir leimar, so you can say, it's logical to say, shebemeshech aseres hadayer she'erichu yamim hitzdabra mishe'erios elu yosem mishanachas lefachos. That from all those 10 generations, there had to accrue from all of the extra fractions of time that are not being reckoned at least one whole year. So in the final analysis, you would have to reckon that it's more than 1,656 years. It has to be that the heavens are going to crack and disintegrate at least once in 1,657 years. So how are we going to reconcile this? So the Rebbe says like this: L'chayra, seemingly, nitan hoya lahasbir, we could explain shahasikum haklali shel elef v'tafresh nun vav shanim hu mishum sheshnois ha'anashim minuyin leminyan shnois olam. Okay, now the Rebbe is now teaching us something new, saying, l'chayra, seemingly, we could explain this whole, what seems to be such a lack of calibration and out of sync, out of whack calculation by saying that that number of 1,656 years is because the years of the people, the generations, are based on the years from the creation of the world. They're being reckoned leminish nice olam. Kedivrei Rashi b'Parshas Kisisa, like Rashi explains in Parshas Kisisa, and I'm going to read that Rashi in a moment. Kiloimar, that is to say, minias mispar shnois hanashim eina lefi shnoiseihem ela lefi shnois olam. That when you talk about how long people lived or how old they were when they had a child, for instance, you're not talking mamish about their birthday. You're talking about what year it is from creation. And if you're able to find this quickly, then I will tell you it's Kisisa Lamed Tezayin, Kisisa 30:16. And I'll read it out loud, and I'll read it in Hebrew and English and slowly, because I would need that if I didn't have the Sefer in front of me. And the context is the census that Hashem told Moshe to count the Jewish people. And there's actually 2 censuses that Moshe took. And fascinatingly enough, the numbers are exactly the same. So Rashi says, I know what you're thinking. And if you're going to ask, is it possible that at both countings, the number of Bnei Yisrael, the men between the ages of 20 and 60, was exactly the same. Nobody died. Nobody had a birthday. Nobody got older. How is that possible? Rashi explains, and the number there is 603,550. And how do we know this? Because the Torah tells us how much silver was collected. So Rashi says, after saying, how is it possible that if the counting was in 2 different years, it's impossible that there would not have been at the first counting some 19-year-olds who were not counted, and they turned 20 by the second year? This is Rashi. Shuva l'davar. And Rashi says, what's the answer? Eitzel shnois ha'anashim b'shana achas nimnu. As regard to the age of the people, it's considered that the 2 census occurred in the same year. But if you're counting based on when they left Mitzrayim, meaning if you're counting the birthdays of the people, it's one thing, and it's taka only 1 year. But if you're counting based on the events of world history, then it was 2 different years. Lefi, because Shalitias Mitzrayim Moinin Min Nisan, because going out of Mitzrayim, you count from Nisan, just like it's explained in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. That's a Rosh Hashanah. Aleph Nisan is a Rosh Hashanah for us. So Lagabe, when the Torah says what year it was from Yetzias Mitzrayim, it is a certain year. And therefore, V'nivna HaMishkan B'Rishayna V'hukam B'Shniya. And therefore, when the Torah speaks about the Mishkan being built, it's built in the first year, but it's erected in the second year, because it's erected on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But when you're talking about the age of the people that are calculated, according to the year since the creation of the world, that is Hamatchilim Tishrei. That begins with the month of Tishrei. So what happens in effect is Shnei HaMinyanim B'Shana Achas. So they both happened within the same 12 months, 1 year. Haminyan Rishon Haya B'Tishrei. The first census was in Tishrei. La'achar Yom HaKippurim. Because Hashem became reconciled with the Jews after the terrible Chet Egel, He forgave them. And they were given the command to build the Mishkan. That was one census. V'hasheni, and the second be'echad be'iyar, after the second type of Rosh Hashanah, which is in Nisan. Okay. Now, there's a lot of back and forth about this Rashi. The Rebbe is mitzayin in a footnote where in Likutei Sichos he treats this. And there's a lot of mefarshim that treat this. But the bottom line is that the Rebbe is saying there's 2 ways in which you could understand the counting, the years in the Torah. They could be about from when the person was born to when they died, or you could be using the historic timeline. And that's not always going to be the same thing. But the Rebbe says, now we're in the second and last paragraph of Sif Dalet. But you're very hard pressed to make an argument that this is what Rashi is thinking here in our parsha, but he doesn't say it. He says it in Kesisa, but he doesn't say it here. Because this is a very huge novelty according to Pshuta Shel Mikra. What's the novelty? That we want to say that when the Torah counts the life, the years of one person, the year that the Torah gives us is not the actual personal years that this person lived, but rather you have to reckon according to the historic timeline and trajectory. Rebbe says this is a very big chiddush. And Rashi would have to say that in a full-throated manner. He would have to explain that that's what he's doing here. And he didn't do that. So there has to be another way of understanding this. And the Rebbe says something that is at once so simple and yet not something that most, if any, people would have arrived at by themselves. The Rebbe says, what's the explanation? Lefi pshat, on the level of pshat, the simple explanation, kasher hatera mitzayenes shegiloi shel adam hu kach v'kach. When the Torah tells us that a person was so and so years old, 92, 182, 187, whatever, 600. But the Torah doesn't say, v'loi bevitui miyuchad, and the Torah doesn't use a specific term, kegoin, like when it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, ben mea ve'eshim shana anoichi hayoim. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I am 120 years old today. We know this, he was born and passed on exactly the same day. But generally, the Rebbe says, when the Torah tells us how old a person is or was, hakavana hi lemispar hashanim be'erach. It is in the ballpark. It is approximately that amount of years. It could be that the person is actually older, maybe even a half a year older. It could also be that maybe he's a half a year younger, but he's already talking when I'm 40, like I am now, blah, blah, blah. Or I'm 40, that's why I need glasses. Or whatever. We do this all the time. Because simply speaking, we go according to the rave. Like if you're 39 and a half years old, it's okay for you to say I'm 40. And if you're 40 and a half, it's okay for you to say you're 40. Because that's what we do. And based on this simple understanding, it becomes more clear and more smooth what Rashi is saying, that they said that once in 1,656 years, the heavens crack and disintegrate. Because we can establish this based on the regular pedestrian reality. Shahayu dayos shebehen haisa she'eris oidefes al mispar hashanim hakasav b'Torah, because there were generations, and there were extra fractions, there were extra amounts. Again, like the Rebbe said earlier, weeks, months, days, on top of what the Torah tells us they were, how old they were. V'chein hayu dayos shebehen haisa chaser tkufas man kol shehi lashlamas mispar hashanim hanakav b'Torah. And just like there are some times where the person was actually a few weeks older or a few months older, there are also times where the Torah gives us an age and people were not yet that age. They were in the ballpark a few weeks before, a few months before. So when you take it in the aggregate, okay, in the average, they even each other out. The missing and the extra even each other out. And the amount will align. It will even out with the chronology of the world, with the years of the world. And that's the answer. As simple, as elegant as that. Now, Rebbe says in Vav, Yesh lahasbir b'kach inin noisaf. We could explain, now we're in a position to explain an additional thing. Ella, however, the Rebbe says, she'ena kol kach b'derech hapshat. It's not mamish pshat. but we're going to take the opportunity to explain this. But first, we have to preface with something. And what is that? L'chayra, seemingly, madu chashuv l'tzayin b'chol echad min hadaris as giloy shel adam b'ledes b'nai. Why is it important to the Torah to tell us how old in all the generations, the chronology of the generations? It's important to the Torah to tell us this person was 182 years old when they had their son, this person was 187 years old. Who cares? The Rebbe says, "Bepashtos," because simply speaking, hasiba shatari mitzayen is leisikidei sheyedu masai iru ha'mayrais hamuskarim b'Torah. Because by giving us this information, the Torah is giving us chronological context for the events that unfold during the span of the lifetime of these people. That's the reason we're being given this information. And based on this, so if we understand that the reason why we're being given the years that certain people were born and how old they were when their children were born is mainly to allow us to understand the exact historic trajectory of the world. Nitan lamar, so then we could say, שהמספר הנקוב בתורה כגילו של איש מסוים, יכול לבטא בעצם מספרים שונים של שונים בהפר של כמעט שנתיים. So we have to understand that based on what the Rebbe has explained, that when the Torah tells us how old somebody is, in order to allow us to understand when certain events unfolded, the Torah could be expressing using a certain number, but there could actually be a 2-year span. There's a 2-year window that could be included in that. So anybody who has ever planned like a big event around a milestone year, you could start to celebrate the 10th anniversary of something from when you start the year going into the 10th year, all the way to the end of the 10th year. That's 2 years. So I don't know, this organization was founded 10 years ago. You could already start celebrating that at the end of 9 complete years, as you're going into the 10th year, but it's not the 10th year yet. Or you could also celebrate it at 2 years later, at the end of the 10th year, right before the start of the 11th year. They're both correct. That whole 2-year span is correct. Kimat shana shlema lefnei melois legilzeh, because the counting begins almost a year before that age is completed, because you're already in your 70th year when you finish your 69th year. You're already in the 70th year. And then you're still 70 till 2 days before you turn, or a day before you turn 71. It's a 2-year span. Lidugma, for example, in the pasuk cited above, that Mr. Chelek lived 187 years when he had his son. So that those words in the Torah could be marking the beginning of when he went in to his 187th year. That is to say, when would that be? When he's 186 years and 2 days and a smidgen. And also it could also be the end of the year that he was 187, which means ma'at b'chos mikuf pei cheshana. He is 1 day or 1 week younger than 188 years. Again, that 2-year span. No. Based on this, it's impossible to know the exact age. We're getting a ballpark figure, but we're not getting the exact age. But it does help to the main goal of what the Torah wants, which is Nitan ladas lefiv es mispar shnais ha'olam. You get an idea of when in the historical sequences happened. You don't know exactly how old this person is. You're not going to know that based on the years that the Torah gives us, but you're going to know when on the historic timeline. Ki hasikuma klali shel kol misperei hashonim matim leminish nois olam. B'chayso yaser b'chelik mizari shel shana. Because in the aggregate, the when you add up the general years, it's going to align with the years of the world. Give or take a little bit. Give or take a little bit. Okay. With this, the Rebbe finishes with the technical explanation on this question, and basically is saying, it's okay, everybody breathe. It's not a mistake, and it's not a contradiction. And the reason why Rashi doesn't address this is because basically the Rebbe is saying we should have been able to get this on our own. Embarrassingly, not only did I not get the explanation on my own, but I never had the question on my own. I'm just not that paying attention to those psukim in the Torah. Embarrassingly. But basically, the Rebbe is saying Rashi doesn't have to address this because we have to understand what it means when the Torah tells us somebody was a certain amount of years old. It doesn't mean to the day. We don't know what their actual birthday is. We don't know when they would have been allowed to go to pre-K and then get into first grade based on whatever deadlines there are about who makes it into that class and who doesn't. We don't have that information. So it's not a year gone missing. It's just the way the system works. Give or take. But when the Torah tells us that Noach lived 950 years, we know when in the chronology of Brias Ha'olam this was. And how do we know this? Because we know who came before. The Torah gives us a chronology. Again, give or take, the Rebbe says. Now, in Zayin, the Rebbe says, Es hasiba b'pnimius hadvarim. Now let's look at this al pi Chassidus. Let's look on a deeper level. Lemai nafka mina. Who cares? Why is this important? Lekach shehaTorah midayekas b'tziyun min yeshnois olam. Because from the fact that the Torah is careful and punctilious to tell us the years from the creation of the world, nitan lahavin la'achar sheyuvnu tchila divrei hamedrash. We'll understand the importance of this after we look at a medrash. And the medrash says as follows: She'achas mima'aloseim shel Yisrael, that among the great attributes that asher mana Achilas, that Achilas or Achilles, and I really tried to find out more about this, and it seems that outside of the Medrash, there's 1 or 2 books that deal with somebody very high profile from Rome converting to Judaism. And interestingly enough, it seems that the expression, the Achilles heel, actually is attributed to this person. But I couldn't find a lot of information about who this was. From the Medrash, it is a Roman emperor. And there seems to have been quite a few high-profile Roman emperors that converted to Judaism. So among the things that that's the way it's pronounced in Hebrew, enumerated about about the Jews and why he wanted to convert, to explain why he wants to convert, that even a katan, this could mean a small child, or it can mean somebody who's not particularly well versed and learned, even such a person knows how many years there are from the creation of the universe. Now the Rebbe says, Kivan Shemalaseim Shal Yisrael Sheniskru Al Yidei Akilas Hevi Oisei Lidei Ratzon Lizgayer, because these Akilas enumerated what it was that motivated him to convert. Move on, we understand. She'ein hein mevias es chachmasam haraba shal Yisrael. That what he's talking about is not the intellectual greatness of the Jews, ela elu milas hakshuras l'das Yisrael, but rather he's talking about the great attributes of the Jewish religion, of the Jewish faith. Hahezber lakachu. What's explanation? What's the greatness? What is the importance? What is the profundity of knowing exactly when the world was created? That any simpleton knows that the world was created exactly how many years prior to whatever day it is. Hahezber lekachu. The explanation is as follows: Ha'emuna b'chidush ha'olam, sha'olam hu nivra. The belief in the novelty of the world, that the world was created. Hi achas miyesodos haTorah. This is one of the basic foundations of the Torah. Because as we know, there was quite a strong belief that the world always existed. So this novel idea that Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz, the Eibishter created the world at a certain time, that the Eibishter precedes the world and not the other way around, is achas miyesodos haTorah kedivrei haRamban. The Ramban writes, Ki hu shoresh ha'emuna, this is the root of faith. V'she'ena mamin bazeh, and a person that doesn't believe in this, v'choshev sha'olam kadmein, and believes that the world preceded all else, chofer be'ikar v'ein lo Torah klal. He repudiates a main thing in Jewish faith. He doesn't have Torah. The Rebbe says, however, b'emuna atzma yesh mispar dargos. But in faith itself, there are various iterations. There are various levels of faith. A person could say, I believe, and another person could say, I believe, but their level of belief or the depth of their belief is completely different. The Rebbe says like this, Yitachein, it's possible. It's possible for a person to believe it, to take it on blind faith, but they lack clarity about what it is they believe. I believe. Sign me up. I believe. What do I believe? Not so sure. Ein boy emuna mitach yediah brura. His faith is not informed faith. He doesn't come to this faith from facts or from understanding. Kedivrei Chazal. And like Chazal teach us famously, Eina doime shmiya l're'iyah. Can't compare hearing something to seeing something. You can't compare faith based on your gut, your kishkes, to faith based on information that you have, that you see. Because even though a person could be sure that what you're telling them is true, it doesn't compare to the concretization and the authentication of the information based on what you see or understand. It's a different level of faith. This is what Akila said is among the factors that impressed him, that motivated him to convert. That even the katan, however you want to understand katan, chronologically or intellectually, but even the katan, their emuna v'yisoida, and the basis, emuna b'vriyas ha'olam, the faith that the world was created, he etzlem yidia brura, that by Bnei Israel, it's not abstruse, it's not a theory. They know this, and they know this clearly. Hu yodea es hazman hamiduyak shaboy barak Kadosh Baruch Hu. So much so that you ask them, what calendar year is this? You don't have to be a rocket scientist among Israel to know what year it is. Misheshis mebrachus. Well, L'shem kach mifaretes hatayra es mispirei shnois hadayrus. And it is for this reason that the psukim delineate the chronology about the people who lived in the various generations. Kedei lahavi lidiasenu es mispar shnois ha'olam b'diuk, to tell us exactly how many years since the world was created, but not to tell us exactly how old a person was actually when these events occurred, because as the Rebbe has explained to us, there's a 2-year window. Now, it is going to align exactly with the years from creation, because when you even it all out, like he said, there's going to be she'erias, there are going to be these fractions, and some are going to be that this person is less than 187 years old. Some are going to be that this person is actually more than 182. So in the aggregate, it's all going to shake out to tell us how many years from Bria Sa'ilam. But we're not going to know exactly how old the person is. So even though it says that Noach was 600 years old when the flood began, and that it was in his 601st year that the waters dried up, and he lived another 350 years, it's still not a stira to the fact that he lived 650 years and not 651 years. Atkan. That's our sikha this morning. And now we'd love to hear people's thoughts.